Welcome to K9s for Veterans, Veterans Helping Veterans. My name is Aaron Constantine. I'll be sitting in for Michael tonight, who unfortunately couldn't be with us. My guest tonight is Wendy Dolan, founder of MIST. And our show tonight is actually in dedication of a soldier who has lost his battle with PTSD. This is Corporal Brandon Myers. He is a Marine veteran, and we would like to take a moment of silence for him. Tonight's show is in dedication to Corporal Myers, and our thoughts and prayers go out to his family. Tonight, Ms. Dolan is back with us to discuss MIST and to see if we've made any headway in getting the word out and possibly getting some legislation moved to see if we can improve this issue. Give me a quick second here. For anyone who's unfamiliar with MIST, the organization, how it came about, what exactly it's doing, can you give us a quick rundown?
Yeah, and thanks for having me back. This is my third time with K9s for Veterans. In July of 2019, my husband had situational anxiety at work and was prescribed Paxil. And 6 days later, no history of mental illness, no debt, great relationships, he ended his life. And what I found out was that he was suffering from a drug side effect called Akathisia that most people have never heard of. And it's my goal in life to make it a household name. And basically, it starts when you stop, start, or change the dosage of many different classes of medications. We've initially focused on the SSRIs and antipsychotics, but over the last few years, many classes of drugs. And I guess my basic message is, for whatever reason you took a medication, if you start feeling worse, it might not be you, it could be the drug.
So the previous case, or should I say the previous show, we had discussed a court case that you were involved with regarding this condition that your husband suffered from, because he wasn't given any warning that this was a possibility.
Right.
And I just wanted to bring it up again because I find it quite interesting that the jury found in your favor.
Correct.
Because they looked at it and just by conscience and ethics, they said this is wrong.
Absolutely.
But that didn't happen with Court of Appeals, unfortunately. Can you express why?
Yeah, I mean, I still feel like I was a winner because a jury of our peers saw the actual drug studies and concluded that Akathisia killed Stuart. In the upper court, there was a discussion regarding, they believed that it was the FDA's fault. And so nobody, neither the lower court nor the upper court, ever believed that Stuart ended his life on purpose. But they were they had a disconnect between who was responsible. The lower court blamed GSK, the upper court blamed FDA. The sadness for me is the drug is still on the market and there's still no black box warning. But at least we had that victory, and thanks to this court case and all the publicity, MIST and Akathisia was put on the map.
And through this whole process, you actually discovered that even doctors weren't even being given the full story by the drug companies, both name brand and generics. Now, different reasons there, but even the doctors that are prescribing these medications are uninformed.
Well, we talk a lot about a patient's right to informed consent. And of course that's important. Everybody should know the risks, the benefits, and then make a educated decision. But what came out in our case, and the reason why MIST is not anti-drug, we're not anti-doctor, is we feel in many ways the doctors are every bit as uninformed as the public. I mean, this has been a journey of information on my part. I didn't know that the FDA gets their drug study results from the drug company. My view of the FDA was that somehow they were an independent tester and they would make these decisions. And what came out in my case was we actually saw the Dear Doctor letter that the prescribing physician got, which basically said Paxil was the next best thing to sliced white bread. And little did they didn't tell us that 25 people died during the drug trial. Almost 40 other people developed akathisia, and they didn't consider this was important. And it turns out that Paxil increases suicide by 800%.
Jesus.
Yeah. So when you talk about, doctors and informed consents, they're not getting the information either.
Unfortunately, this smacks very similar of the issue with Percocets, with opioid painkillers.
Correct.
The studies were misleading. The doctors were given misleading information. Everybody was told it was safe and non-addictive, and we clearly know now that that is not the case.
Absolutely.
Well, let's see. And so, again, let's reiterate that we're not anti-drug here. We are not anti-medicine for antidepressants, pain medication. We just feel that people need to know what they're getting into. Doctors need to know what they're getting into so they can more accurately prescribe, and that seems to be where we're running into problems. But there's actually legislation in attempting to address some of this problem.
They're trying to, one of the issues right now is, and Aaron and I discussed this before, is 85% of Americans are required to take a generic drug. And it's only the brand name manufacturer that can change the label. And unfortunately, many side effects come out way down the path. And so the generic company says, well, you can't sue us because we didn't make the actual formula, and then brand names say, well, hey, that's not our generic drug anymore. We sold it to you.
Yeah.
And so one of the legislations to try to address some of this is that perhaps a generic drug company, once they receive information about side effects, that they're also able to change the label. But,
Unfortunately, with everything else that's going on
it's
Capitol
one
Hill,
of those.
it's kind of taken a back
It's
seat.
one of those bills that is out there. But anyway,
But the general idea is empowering someone to update the information when the information comes in.
right.
And there was one other, basically to somewhat empower different departments to further research the connection between these meds and akathisia, because they're still not necessarily sure the mechanism, like what's actually tripping this off.
Well, that's great that you brought that up, because just recently in this journal, Mad in America, there is a very wonderful writer, Robert Whitaker, who I know very well, and Derek, I think his name is Blumke. They just did a whole thing on screening and drug treatments and veteran suicide. And you and I had discussed this. While we're not showing official causation,
Right.
it's a connection. And so I think they're starting to look at some of these things, starting, and I think one of the things that we talked about on other shows is these veterans bills. There was one called HR 4640 that came out a couple years ago, and the most recent one this year, and that's trying to show the connection between the number of medications and veteran suicides.
Right.
Again, it's introduced, and again, with today's political climate, this is not a priority, though it should be.
It gets roadblocked. And unfortunately, the most recent National Veteran Suicide Prevention Report apparently shows that while more veterans are seeking help, screening for PTSD, different mental health issues, and receiving medications and therapies, unfortunately the suicide rate has continued to slightly tick up.
Yes.
And you kind of have to wonder, since we know that antipsychotics, SSRIs, painkillers, I think in a few more that I can't remember on top, these classifications of medications do potentially carry this problematic side effect that can, in some cases, as in your husband's, unfortunately be deadly.
Absolutely. And so, I mean, what I think is important here is, who doesn't love our veterans? Who doesn't care about what's happening to them? But we keep tiptoeing around all this, more help, more this, more that, but we keep circling back to these medications, and unfortunately, they're not being explored.
That and, well, so I've one of my frustrations with the VA is that we are limited to the generics, and so being able to to have this legislation through that would allow the information to be updated even after it's gone to generic form, to me, and I'm pretty sure all veterans, makes a world of difference. Because while in the military we may have been used to being told what to do, now we have a say in it. And
Absolutely.
I feel as though limiting these drug companies' ability to put that new information out there so that informed consent, in my opinion, can be accommodated. This is just an absolute must.
I couldn't agree more. But, Erin,
Yes.
I just want to acknowledge, and I'm so honored because we've known each other for years, this is her K9s for Veterans debut. And I'm thrilled because, not that she experienced akathisia, but you've been so articulate about experience akathisia. And I think for me, and I'd like to share what we've had in our multitudes of private conversations
Yes.
about your experience. I mean, first of all, I guess the number one question would be is what meds were you taking and what were the reasons specifically?
When I was in the Army, I wanted to try to quit smoking.
Okay.
Noble pursuit, I believe. But they gave me, I want to say it was a generic form of Chantix or Wellbutrin. I knew it was something to curb my cravings.
And you are aware that Chantix
now.
has been associated with suicide.
Yes, now.
Right.
But I remember taking the medication, and at first I thought it would be a positive because it immediately changed my palate, and even the flavor of a cigarette was just, couldn't do it.
Couldn't do it.
Problem is that it altered my palate for everything. Everything tasted horrible. I started feeling very angry, very aggressive, as in kick puppy aggressive. And anyone who knows me, I adore animals, so that was a big one. So I said, look, I called up my doctor and I says, I'm not taking this anymore. Should I come back into sick call? Because in the military, when you want to get seen, you show up as early as possible and hope they get to you. But he agreed to stop it, and it still took a week or two for this aggression to wear off. I basically just barricaded myself in my barracks room because I'm a very relaxed, happy-go-lucky person, or at least I try to be in my day job. But that was the first experience with it, and then down the line, I was on a medication. I can't remember the exact name of it, but it was to handle diagnosed bipolar and or symptoms of PTSD. Because I was actually diagnosed before I got out of the military. And it wasn't until I got off of it, and that's when I started getting the muscle response. I don't know if this gives away my age, but so if you've ever tested a 9-volt battery with your tongue to see if it's still working, because we had to put the battery in the car, wanted to see if it worked. That jolt you get, it's a low amperage type of jolt, but it feels, I believe someone mentioned, like bugs under the skin. I had that all through my legs, all through my arms, and sometimes it would go for hours, and I would just pace around the room. I would chew gum, like I would keep gum for these instances to something to gnaw on, and my hands always wrenching. And again, I somewhat recognized that feeling because, again, it left me angry and frustrated that I wanted this to stop. But because I didn't know what it was at the time, I didn't seek external treatment. I just tried different methods of my own to soothe it. And fortunately for me, I was successful in somewhat curtailing those symptoms. And over time, the episodes have popped up less and less. But still to this day, periodically I will get this jolt in my spine, and it radiates down my arms and legs, and it just hurts. And the only thing that seems to alleviate it in the immediate is movement.
Well, akathisia, and we have videos on our MISS website, and you'll see one this evening, has external and internal symptoms. And one of the things it can lead to, which is, of course, the most damaging, is violence, self-harm, and suicide. And for you, it sounded like you're not a violent person, but you felt like you wanted to kick a puppy, and that wasn't
definite feelings of aggression there, and it was just I just kept having to remind myself that this isn't me, this will pass, but just like it's and some people still don't believe this. Just as it's painful being depressed, it is just as painful being angry when you know that you have no legitimate reason to be.
Yeah, I mean, how are you able to, there's something called chronic akathisia, which goes on. And you'll see that in this film that, I mean, thank God you don't have quite the symptoms that these people have in the video. But how are you able to manage your symptoms? I mean, this is pretty, feeling, batteries, feeling like you couldn't,
Yeah.
feeling angry. How are you able to just manage all this?
Basically, throw everything at a wall, see what sticks. But one that did help, part of my pain management due to my injuries from my military service, the VA gave me Percocet. Now, of course, as we just mentioned with the issue of addiction with Percocet, I eventually came to the decision I didn't want to be on that med anymore. But I didn't see any other effective alternatives right in front of me. Now, I have found other methods to manage my condition. It's allowed in some states, not allowed in others. But it has been greatly beneficial to me. And because I still occasionally have these instances, I have that go-to. But say like this past week, as we were discussing earlier, I was down in a state where it's not legal. And of course, I behaved myself. But I was left dealing with my anxiety, my PTSD, my pain, and the possibility of that episode if I chose to use Klonopin.
Yeah.
And I've developed almost and it's sad because I don't want to discourage people from still utilizing medications for mental health.
Absolutely not.
But
Absolutely
I've
not.
developed almost a fear, like I'm not going to go that route unless I absolutely can't handle it anymore. Because akathisia, it does hurt. And what if that next time it doesn't stop?
Well, since this is K9s for Veterans, one of the things that you said has been so useful is your service dog.
Yes, that furry little bum. He's been with me for 15 years, and the thing about akathisia is that it almost like feels like your body demands sensory input, something to distract you from the feeling under your skin. And just by laying across me, cueing me to perform a task for him, something to kind of get my mind off of it, that helps with the akathisia, that also helps when I start to have a PTSD episode or anxiety attack. This wonderful furry creature will draw my attention away from my own problems. And I know that seems simplistic, but I don't really know how to describe how it works. But it manages... It helps me compartmentalize what I'm going through in the moment and focus on him, and thus makes those issues a bit more manageable.
Yeah, and that's why MIST is very much supportive of the work of K9s for Veterans for years, because of exactly the story you just told us. But we also were just talking about what's been going on in Canada. Would you like to share what we've
Yes,
been talking about, because I think it's so important from the standpoint of a military person.
So back in 1993, I'm not even going to try and say the name of the medication because I'll mess it up and it's pointless. Anyway, so it's an anti-malaria drug that was actually developed by the U.S. government in cooperation with a U.S. pharmaceutical company. And obviously the reason for an anti-malaria medication, the Vietnam War was going on at the time, and more soldiers were suffering the consequences. As a matter of fact, my uncle was a Vietnam vet who contracted it. So anyway, but the timing of the medication coming out ended up not being as useful because the Vietnam War was winding down. Anyway, the medication shows up in the Canadian market, and the Canadian government decides to utilize it for soldiers in Somalia in 1993.
Right.
Now, the soldiers that were deployed at the time were not, according to them, given the option to
Right.
say yes or no to this medication, and most people in the military have served will understand that sentiment perfectly. Problem is that they also weren't warned of the potential side effects.
Right.
And these men are dealing with various symptoms of akathisia,
Right.
long term. And because you think about it, this is back in 1993, and these people are still suffering and seeking redress for this some 20 years later. And I think it will demonstrate If they win the case, I think it'll at the very least establish kind of an ethical precedent
Right.
that even soldiers have the right to informed consent with their medications.
What was fascinating, and it's on the MIST website, and I believe the title is Guinea Pigs, something, I should have written it down, but I forgot, but it's about using veterans for guinea pigs. But what I found was fascinating about this story was that they're not suing the drug company. This veterans group is suing the government.
Well, I mean,
Because they're saying, well, that we're being forced to take this,
Yes.
and then look at lots of suicides, and.
well, yeah, and I agree, because ultimately you sign up to serve your country, serve the government, to be at the will of the government, then I think that they are then responsible for taking care of you. Certain things they can't accommodate for because it's the nature of the job, but something as
Right.
simple as making sure that mandatory medications doesn't damage you for life, I think that's a pretty easy ask.
Yeah, no, and it's one of my greatest things that upsets me is that, without consent, that these drugs are being given without consent.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the things that's been an issue with the VA, and again, you could speak to this way better than me, is this idea that because services have been limited, it's been much easier to give medication cocktails. And, from some of the vets that I've spoken to, they're given 90-day supplies. Am I accurate with this?
Yes.
And they are not monitored.
Yeah, so
And
it depends on the scheduling of the drug. So, like, let's see you were on something like Percocet or Vicodins to manage pain. Drugs like that through federal law are limited to a 30-day supply, and then you have to come back in. I believe that there are some psychotropic meds that also fall under that category, but if they can give you a 3-month supply so that they can free up space for other patients, they absolutely will. Mm-hmm. And I'm not trying to accuse the medical staff of shooing us away. They are simply trying to manage the amount of time and resources they have. Mm-hmm. And so far, this is what they've had to come up with.
Right, absolutely.
So what we're going to do now is we are going to show a video that we've shown before, but I think it bears repeating. It's going to describe the potential symptoms of akathisia, not only as a person experiencing it, but a friend or family witnessing it. So let's go ahead and bring that up.
Akathisia is an intense inner restlessness brought on as a side effect of medication. As many as 5% of patients taking some medications can suffer from symptoms so severe that it sometimes drives them to violence, self-harm, and suicide. Akathisia typically occurs when a medication is started, stopped, or changed in dosage or type. It is during these changes that it's critical for others to watch for symptoms of akathisia. But as a first responder, medical professional, family member, or friend, how can you identify symptoms of akathisia in a patient or loved one? Visible symptoms to watch out for include rocking back and forth, pacing, marching in place, inability to be still, shifting weight, unusual or violent behavior. Less visible symptoms can include an increase in insomnia, anxiety and agitation, irritability, impulsivity, aggressiveness, hostility, and panic attacks. The following videos were recorded by people suffering from akathisia.
I sleep 1 hour in 24 hours for the last week.
Just want this to stop. This is what it looks like for me a lot of the time. This hurts. It hurts. It hurts.
If the situation is urgent, call emergency personnel or go to the nearest emergency room for help. By recognizing the symptoms at the onset of akathisia, those suffering can be helped before it's too late.
That's a video produced by Ms. Dolan and her organization to try and demonstrate, to inform people what they're looking at if they're seeing this type of behavior in a loved one. Seeing that myself, bringing back a lot of memories of the pacing and the bouncing knees and just wanting it to stop.
So we're getting towards the end of the show,
Yes.
unfortunately. But I think that for us at MIST and for K9s, just spread the word for what you learned tonight. I mean, we are all about prevention and education. In fact, Erin was asking us some of our newer projects, and what we're trying to do is maximize the audiences we can see. So we've had a very successful train campaign in the city of Chicago, where I think on over 200 train cars on various lines, you look up and you see the Miss logo.
At least once a week when I'm riding the train, I see those.
Yeah, you see those. And so our newest thing that should be coming out soon is in New York City. We're going to be putting 88 platforms. There will be train signage with the missed information, and apparently at that time of year in New York, over 8 or 9 million people ride those trains. And if you're interested in MIST, go to MIST.co. If you have an organization that you would like us to speak at, we're happy to do it, because we're always pushing the audience, the envelope for a new audience. One other thing that's a very new mission initiative is the role with Alcoholics Anonymous. That there's been some studies, again, they unfortunately don't show direct causation, but they are showing that sometimes taking antidepressants can lead non-alcoholic people to have an urge to drink.
Yes.
Are you familiar at all with that work?
Honestly, I haven't. I've been so interested in just the medications involved
Yeah.
and kind of paying attention to that. But no, I will absolutely look into that. Well, we're going to wrap up here tonight. Again, our thoughts and prayers go out to the Myers family. We want to thank Ms. Dolan for joining us tonight.
And I want to thank Erin for her TV debut here, so all good.
Anyway, thank all you for joining us, and we'll hope to see you next show.